So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good, whatever time it is, wherever you are. I am Aneesh de Vos, and we have, apart from our amazing guest, we do have David Butler. And David, you're actually really looking forward to having a chat with Lisa Morrison today, aren't you?
Yes, very much so.
Okay. Lisa is a trainer, a consultant of emotional well-being and mental health services. That's where she has done a lot of her work. And what we're going to talk about today is we are going to talk about Lisa's lived experience of being in a suicidal crisis and attempting suicide. So I'm going to say to everybody watching today that be careful of your own triggers. If this is too much, switch off the screen, okay? And by all means, reach out to any organisations, wherever you are. In the UK, I'm going to think the Samaritans, because that's how I started my career coming into therapy, albeit in a voluntary basis. So reach out where you need to reach out. Go get that support, okay? There are lots of charities across the entire world that can offer you the support that you need if you're triggered right now. So, Lisa, we've just had kind of a brief bit of a chat beforehand. It is so lovely of you to be with us. And I and David both said, you know what, thanks for coming on and talking about this, because this is a subject that people always get shocked by, but they are not great at looking at it. And indeed, part of your work is about getting that appropriate message out there for others, and just the education of how to be with somebody in distress. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What do you want to tell us today, Lisa? You know, really, this is definitely about you today. What is it that you want people watching this to know, so that they can tap people on the shoulder and say, do you know what, go listen to what Lisa Morrison is saying on Community Connections, and indeed go listen to Lisa Morrison wherever she is.
Thanks. Do you know, it's funny because when you said about the topic, I wasn't sure what we were going to talk about, and I was really pleased actually, because I am, this is an experience that I've, it's so much part of my, and a message I want to get out there, I suppose. And yet, when I thought about it afterwards, I thought, oh my goodness, well, you really need the leading researchers and academics and all of them, because it's such a responsibility to actually talk about this topic, and yet I have, I've been very involved here in Northern Ireland. We've got the Towards Zero Suicide program. I was very involved in that before I left working in the trust to set up my own business. And I guess we are talking about it more. Some of the myths are being dealt with. So it's quite difficult to actually hone in on, and I've got my own personal, take on things as well, given my experiences. So I guess I just want to say before we talk any more about this, is that my lived experience is my lived experience. It's my truth. I don't speak for everybody. And I think because I'm somebody who went into mental health services at the age of 14, and I have 7 diagnoses behind my name, all of which have finally been resolved under a label of trauma, which is not a disorder, but complex trauma. It was a relief for that to be recognized.
Yeah.
I have a specific heart for people who are still in services, and we know all the issues with that, non-resourcing when you're in a crisis, how you're being dealt with. You see a lot of it on Twitter. And so I suppose that is also the angle. And then there's the trauma angle for me, when I've begun to understand my own experiences with self-harm and suicidal behavior. And it's important to distinguish between the two. Obviously, I'm having a sip of this because I am nervous. I've learned when I do talks and things to keep water, and I just admit it's nerve-wracking.
Well, do you know what? Thank you for just your openness, truly.
Yeah, well, it is nerve-wracking. I always keep water. But I guess just to say, you know, for me, when I'm talking about this, because self-harm, there's all different kinds of self-harm.
Yeah.
There's self-harm without the intent to end your life.
Yeah.
You know, and so I distinguish between those two things because I have a long history of self-harm as well.
Okay.
And it is one of the risk factors for people going on to complete suicide, which is why attitudes and things in emergency departments and stuff for people like me who would be repeat offenders was the language that would be used for someone like me, and frequent flyer, you know, and some of the experiences in the emergency departments, if you're thinking that, you know, I'm already a higher risk, and yet it's quite difficult to go and ask for help again when you've had negative experiences. Anyway, I'm rambling a bit, but just to distinguish between those two as well. Yeah.
I don't think you were rambling. I think that you made some really important points there. The difference between the self-harm, what can sometimes inadvertently happen, and then, you know, absolute definite decision around to end your life. David, what do you want to say to Lisa?
I want to say to Lisa, I started to read or work through your website over the past couple of days, especially this morning, and I was unbelievably moved by your honesty and knowing about your particular journey. And yes, this is personal, and we all do it, and we all experience it in our own way, as many therapists have said, and many advocates of treatment, is that, you know, well, from my side of the fence anyway, which is person-centered treatments, particularly, is that, you know, we see the world as we are, not how it actually is. So these experiences are very, very personal. Especially, yeah, your vlog, coming home, your poems, Blinded, and gently, they all appealed to me on a very and they all hit me on a very personal level. So again, you can probably tell that I've been very moved by reading and watching you, and I recommend that anybody goes to your website if they just read those and listen to those particular extracts of it.
Shane, thank you, David. And, you know, I think I went back to work in services, you know, after I had an 8-year period of being extremely unwell, in and out of crises. I ended up in ICU on life support, in and out of the emergency department with self-harm and stuff, lost my job, lost my marriage, ended up in this treatment center. I'm not going to talk about all that here, but coming back, I ended up as a trainer, lead peer trainer in the recovery college. And that's another whole story on its own, but it was a really useful experience for me to get to know staff, a little bit about how the system worked. You know, I had the key to the door that I used to be, you know, not okay. And I'm an acceptable mad right now, you know, because I'm not on 20+ tablets, and I'm not 7 stone heavier because of that, and not able to even put together or respond within 30 seconds or a minute to a question because my brain's not working. Because what happens to us, what I think, you know, when there's not the resources, there's not the recognition of what's going on. You know, I've had ECT and they say that's the last resort. But in fact, I was never offered therapy because I was deemed too unwell. So who decides? You know, there's not other things. So all they could do was medicate. And it wasn't that anybody was particularly unkind to me. I think I was very fortunate in many ways in services. And yet I was just a risk assessment. I've got some of my files from in and out of our inpatient unit over 8 years. And it says the same thing every time, the discharge care plan. And you say to yourself, if somebody is repeatedly going into crisis, what needs are we not meeting? You know, what are we not addressing? A safety plan, you know, is great, and we can talk about that because there's some evidence around it being useful for. My safety plan isn't just a page long, you know, it's 8 pages long, as I need to condense it for quick. But for somebody like me who's been in the service my whole life, I've been in straitjacket as a young adult, in seclusion, things like that. I carry all that untreated trauma, apart from my own trauma, with me in a service, and then in a state of high distress, needing help and support. It's important in my plan now for people to know what they need to know about that, you know.
And you say that very clearly throughout the website, and you know, I often puzzle, how do you bring personal experience into a training environment, a coaching environment? And you obviously do it very well.
Well, I think, you know, I was so, when I woke up every day for about 5 years wanting to die. Now, I wasn't actively suicidal all that time, you know, because you can move into a stage. If you read Rory O'Connor, who's a leading researcher, he's just got a book out, When It's Darkest, and it's a very accessible book. I would encourage anybody to get that, people, whoever you are, professional, if you've been bereaved by suicide, because I'm only about halfway through, but it does very nicely, you know, kind of cover things. But I think, what did you just ask me there, Dave? Sorry, I went off on a, what
No, you didn't go off on one at all. You were very eloquently replying to what I'd said, and I didn't so much ask a question as make a statement, but it was around, I was admiring the way that you actually brought personal experience into training.
Yes. So what I did when I started to get well, and I took about a year to train my brain to read again. I'd been a prolific reader, but 20 plus tablets messes with you, and I'd been on tablets for 30 years of my life. So the withdrawals over a 1.5 year period of being on them for a lifetime was horrific, and I didn't sleep sometimes at all. But I was hungry to understand, and I was hungry to say I was a hopeless case. You know, I mean, my husband would say, and we're back together now, and he always loved me, but he would.
I'm really pleased to hear that.
Oh, it's beautiful, isn't it?
But he would say, you know, he'd almost come to accept that I was going to die. It was just a matter of time with the repeated, you know, and that's what my family lived with. And I think we so often forget about people who are supporting and caring for people who are distressed, you know, and the impact of them and them being heard as well. It's terrible. But, you know, so I took about a year to get my brain back online, and I just wanted to learn about this stuff. And what I found is my experience of my recovery, I almost had to get well. And I don't even like the word get well. I don't even really like the word recovery, because I found working in a recovery college was another barrier to labeling, you know.
And it becomes medicalized if we talk about recovery, doesn't it? We medicalize it. And in actual fact, this is a human response to distress and to situations that are way beyond your control. You are having a normal response that you are designed to have to situations that are abnormal.
Yeah. And there's so much that impacts on that. And that's the research, you know, and I think that's an important message to put out there, that there is no one causal factor for people who go on to complete suicide. You know, it's a complex mix, and it's like with COVID and this, everybody suddenly has got a mental health condition. You know, it's the same with people who go on to complete suicide. There are issues like employment, people losing their jobs, breakdown of relationships, you know, depression that comes from that, grieving, loneliness, economic, you know, just not having enough money to put on the table. And those are not those are not problems with our brains,
No.
although there are problems with our brains if you read Bruce Perry's work in terms of the science,
Yeah.
if you know what I mean, but it's
Yeah.
not a mental disorder.
No, it's a
So
biological response.
Yet we're never getting to address the actual root causes. That's what I'm doing now, finally getting therapy which recognizes that I've had dissociation.
Okay.
So how I'm addressing a lifetime of self-harming and suicidal behavior has taken a completely different, but I'm able to advocate for myself now. And I had to get well to do that.
Mm.
And was it that you felt that you had to fit a pattern where society could hear you? Are you asking for society to hear you in a different way?
Do you know, with this being Mental Health Awareness Week, it's been a tough week for me.
Yeah.
Because I was labeled from the age of 14, and that's who I believed I was mentally ill. And not that there's, you know, that people find their labels really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and we need our labels, and Lucy Johnson spoke about it. We need to access different things, and sometimes to get the treatments, except if you've got the wrong label. You know, if you're getting the right treatments. And for me, it was after 30 years with 7 labels, finally getting complex trauma. I said, nobody has ever put schizoid, schizoaffective, this, that, the next thing. You're looking at my history, nobody's ever said this girl is traumatized. You know, so it was
because there's too much what is wrong with you and not enough. Do you know what happened to you? Tell me as much as you want to tell me. Let's hear what happened. And we just jump in too quickly. This is wrong, that is wrong, here's your label, stick it on. And you're right, it gets us funding, and it does, you know, I'm not denying that, but no, what happened to you?
Yeah. Or at least allowing the person to define their own, you know, and our systems are so under-resourced, and the right training is not there. So everything is about risk assessments and covering our backs, because in fact, if a staff member loses a patient, and need to say as well that a lot of people who go on to complete suicide aren't known to mental health services.
No.
You know, we think that everybody who goes on is known. So, I mean, I'm also talking about a specific area with that. But yeah, we don't, you know, nobody ever talked to me about what did you used to be good at. I played in an orchestra. I was a competitive swimmer. I'd been a teacher. I'd been a lecturer. You know, it just completely lost who I was. But anyway, I suppose we're talking about suicide, and I suppose it's important to put out there that, you know, it's a feeling of in that moment, or in those moments of that where you've moved on to actually plan, for me, it was that feeling of being completely trapped, and that there just wasn't another way to get out of it. Shame played a big part in it. Shame is a very, very, for me, I think one of the most crippling things. And with trauma, and especially with things like sexual violence, rape, you know, which are things that I've experienced.
I'm sorry you've experienced that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's not okay as a ridiculous thing to say. But yeah, you know, so with that already comes shame, and that vulnerability and exposure, and just not seeing another way. It's just a desperate place to be. And I often feel, I mean, one of the public messages that we do try to get out there is that suicide is preventable, you know, which is a really important message. I saw on Twitter, somebody in one of the trusts had said, well, if people are going to kill themselves, they're going to do it. You know, really dangerous way to think and be, because then, you know, then you don't have to provide people with the support when they're in crisis. So it's really dangerous, and yet it is preventable. And I always really feel, I've been bereaved by suicide, but I always think of people who've lost somebody, especially very close, the ripple effect goes, they say up to about 130 people or something like that are affected by each suicide.
Yeah.
And I always think when we say it's preventable, how does that feel when you've lost somebody, you know, and you know, and there's the message out there, and it is an important message to be out, but I think sometimes we get so stuck in evidence-based research, academia to prove these things. We forget, you know, behind all of this, they're human beings who are suffering.
Yes.
And yes, we need to get those messages out there. And it can be difficult on the likes of Twitter with short character things. And I just think it's important to acknowledge that. And for anybody who's maybe listening to this as well, you know, hindsight is a perfect science, and sometimes they don't see signs. I don't know. I don't know. I've had a few second chances, you know.
I'm glad.
Hmm.
Lisa, you talk about the education of being with somebody in distress. What would you like to see? What would you know, and I get that you know, bugger the academics, excuse me, academics, but bugger the academics right now. We're talking to people. We're having conversations with a person. You are Lisa Morrison. Okay, so what do you think that would help to say to somebody and to be with somebody that is in that level of distress? Because, you know, there's a part of a person that is suicidal. We are made of these many parts, and that part gets the loudest voice at that time. So how can we be, you know, we are just mere mortals, average people. How can we, what is it that you feel you would like people to know, whether or not you are an academic, the Prime Minister themselves, a nurse, a doctor, a carer, a mother, a daughter, a sister? What do you want people to know?
Well, do you know what? This is the basis of my work, it feels. This is really, and it seems such a basic thing. How do you educate about this stuff? I don't know, but I'm hoping I'm going to figure a way forward. Just to say, one of the myths is, before I talk about this, because it is relevant to this, one of the myths is that if you ask people, are they suicidal or are they thinking about killing themselves, language is important around this as well, to be very clear about that, that it'll make somebody think of doing it. That's not true. You know, somebody who is not thinking about suicide will just say, you know, so it is important to ask. And if you're concerned, to be direct and ask somebody. And if you feel out of your depth with that, there's Zero Suicide Alliance train you can go on. If you feel out of depth, you can phone in Northern Ireland, you can phone the likes of Lifeline, phone a GP, phone an out of hours, get help and support. But if somebody's telling you, and if you feel there's an immediate risk, you know, then you can always call someone in, you know, if you feel you need support. Yeah. But my experience, because can I just say that I still think about suicide. I still have suicidal thoughts. Yeah. And there have been a few occasions over the last 4 years where that's actually progressed further than I thought it ever would. And I have everything going for me now. But I'm also finally getting treatment for the trauma that wasn't, and I say treatments, I have a relationship with a therapist who is very human and who understands that trauma, you know, is held in the body. And so I'm not expected to recount a narrative and re-traumatize myself. You know, she's giving me a platform to put a narrative to things, and find different ways of listening, which is just such a blessing, is all I can call it. But I've had with that, and I don't have tablets. I have sometimes taken stuff to help me sleep and help my thoughts. So although I speak out about medication, I'm also not, we can polarize just you know, things and decide that it's either this or that. And I just can't get caught up in that. You know, I just can't. I think there's a lot there about choice and education and all of those kind of things. But what I've found over this, and with that, I have a lot of emotions coming up, which were always dealt with by self-harm. And Bruce Perry speaks in his book, What Happened to You? Oprah asks him about cutting specifically, and he talks about people with dissociative, you know, where there has been especially longer term trauma prolonged, that dissociation is part of releasing natural painkillers, you know, opioids.
Yeah, you feel
and
better.
That's why, you know, he actually taught, it's the first person who's kind of said about my story that it was actually a regulating thing. It was many things, and self-harm is many different things for different people when there's not the intent to die. So I also don't want to simplify that. But I realize now there was a regulation in that, you know, it was a way of helping my body regulate. And that's what we do when we're with people in distress, because when I'm in distress, I am completely dysregulated, you know, and I'm using language here, you know, I also assume that people all know the language that we use. So, I mean, dysregulate, being distressed, is my heart is racing. It's like being really, really anxious and fearful. So when that happens, my brain can't hear anything. I mean, I had a nurse say to me the one time when I was in a highly distressed state, I wasn't doing anything to harm myself, saying, have you used your coping tools? Now my brain, my prefrontal cortex, my thinking brain, and I have lots of things that I do to help myself now.
Yeah.
I couldn't access that at that moment until we help people, you know, calm down a bit and feel safe and feel heard and whatever. And it's like that all over, and it's the same for staff members. So we have a system where staff are feeling on edge. There's a culture of blame. Yeah. Staff are not going to be regulated. They're trying to get through their day with not enough staff there or whatever. We've got patients coming in, whether it's an outpatient or inpatient, whatever, you know, highly distressed. And we're not taught just to be with people. No. You know, if I think my daughter came home having broken up with her boyfriend, very distressed, what is my instinct to do? You know, reach out. And I'm not saying people should be holding you, but people are so uncomfortable to be with you in that state. And I know when I'm in that state, I can think there is no way out of this. I am never going to get away. This pain, these thoughts in my head. And sometimes the trouble with actually being more well is that I can actually look at my thoughts and say, you're mad. Do you know, it's not like that. Yeah. And yet everything in me believes it is. Mm-hmm. And it's even more difficult then in some ways. But what I've learned is when I've been like that, if I have a friend who's been able to just be with me, you know, and say, it's going to pass. It's going to pass. Because you can actually feel like it is so overwhelming and so, you just need to get out of it, you know. And yet, so, I mean, being with somebody in distress is not about having to fix it or have all the answers. It's being human. It's I don't know what to say. I'm so, you know, if you're looking at somebody, what would you say? I'm so sorry that you're so distressed. I'm so sorry that you're hurting so much. Yeah. You know, we'll find a way. We'll find a way. We maybe can't see it now, but we'll find a way.
And I'm feeling that there's also that thing of don't go on at somebody why they shouldn't do something. Just acknowledge that that's how they feel. And you know, Bruce Perry says, doesn't he, in his neurosequential model of, you know, the bottom up, regulate, relate, then reason. You ain't going to get any reasoning going on with somebody, like you say, when you are so dysregulated. And it is hard to be a person on the other side. You know, let's not deny that it's not hard to be a person on the other side of, oh my goodness, somebody that I care about, or indeed somebody that I'm working with is feeling like this. But in actual fact, if you can come back and work in your regulation as the person, the support, the listener, whatever it is, if you can think, okay, what can I do? Because actually, this is bloody big stuff. Put your feet on the ground. Bring yourself up. You will begin to regulate. That person, it's a neurobiological chemical response, will be able to come into that in their time. But the very thought of the presence, of just offering that presence, that's where we begin. Because if we start thinking, right, I've got to fix this, actually we're not regulated.
Yeah.
We're not regulated. So, and you know what, if you can't do it, get the bugger out the way and bring in somebody that can.
It's very powerful just to listen to somebody in a non-judgmental. And you know something, I look back at my experiences, and the things that I remember are kindnesses. You know, you feel so unseen. I remember sitting in an emergency department, just feeling judged, you know, bandaged, whatever, and just somebody looking at you and acknowledging you. You know, when you just think you're the most insignificant, you know, useless person in the world, and so full of shame and inadequacy and not good enough and never going to fit in, you know, where things used to go through my head. It's such a lonely place to be. And if somebody's just willing to, you know, step into that space a bit, it can just, because the feelings do pass, you know. But the thing is as well, it's really important, I think what you're saying there about regulating is, the reality is people dealing with me, and whether that be my family or professionals, it was frustrating, you know, nothing was working. And we do need to be looking at what wasn't working, but also look at supporting. I ran a piece with some staff members. Our clinical education center did risk assessment training, and I did a lived experience piece. And I gave a case scenario very similar to my own to this group of professionals, and said to them, you know, how is somebody appearing in emergency departments, alcohol often plays a role as well. You know, in suicide, obviously it lowers your defenses, and, you know, issues coming up with that as well. So it's another area. But, and I said to them, and how does it make you feel? You know, this person coming again, they've got children, etc., etc. And then I asked, what are your thoughts? You know, what do you think about this? They did some group work and came up with things, and it was quite amazing, the very powerful emotions that came up in staff. And I was actually quite caught off guard, got quite emotional with staff member just saying how sorry they felt for this woman, that she wasn't getting the help, and how she obviously cared for her children. And, you know, it was the compassion in this professional's response took me completely off guard in the thing. But I think, you know, and it's another important thing I want to say, because I know people that I've met who don't know anything about mental health, who've met me and just like me for me, you know, beyond all my labels, but have learned actually that there is, you know, with dissociation and things, I have all my parts, and I can, you know, I can sometimes use black humor around suicide and self-harm and some of the things like that. And, you know, learning some of the perceptions that they had of people who went on to, you know, end their life. You know, their beliefs like people are selfish, things like that. And it was very interesting for me, because the people who were coming up with these things were really compassionate people. And once they got to know me and we were able to have a conversation about these things, that completely changed their outlook and understanding, and ended up being the person who could actually be with me in distress. Wow. And I think we so often jump in to judge other people because they've used the wrong language about things. They've had misconceptions about stuff, and people end up afraid to actually be honest about what they think, and how they feel about something, because we shut people down so quickly, you know, and I know myself with my history that I can be one of those people to shut people down and say, well, that's so judgmental, and, you know, triggers in me. But I actually think, unless it's obviously very, you know, directed to, but I think if we can open up these conversations, we say it's okay not to be okay.
Yeah.
You know, if we can't create safety for us to honestly come with what's going on, for staff members to be able to say what's going on for them, carers, people, if you're caring for somebody who's repeatedly self-harming, suicidal, the stress on that and impact on their mental health, emotional well-being, you know, it's not an individual issue.
We've spoken lots of times, haven't we, David, about we can't keep sitting in an echo chamber. We have to, and you know, this is possibly one of the toughest, not, you know, but it's one of the toughest conversations, isn't it, when you talk to somebody about suicide. That is so difficult. I mean, Chad Farrar set up the Samaritans on the back of a teenage girl that started her periods and thought the devil was in her, because it was, you know, a long time ago, beginning of the 1900s, when he was first a vicar, and because she thought somehow the devil had got into her, because nobody, and has influenced so much, you know, across the world. But we can't keep sitting in these echo chambers, can we, Lisa? And you know what, I've been in awe of you for quite a while, if I'm honest. I've been quite choked hearing you and listening to you, because you represent the difference. You represent the conversations that people are uncomfortable having. Even people who are trained do have this. They are a professional, or they've read 50 studies or conducted 50 studies. In actual fact, there is nothing more real than somebody sharing their narrative to say, actually, this is how it feels. For me, I'm very moved today. What about you, David? Because I might cry, because I'm known for that, Lisa.
Yeah, you know, but going back to what Lisa was saying about where she is now and where that started, a couple of things she said, one in the blog, one in the vlog, was things that really resonate with me, is that, you know, you say that you don't quite know or understand what this second chance is. And I felt like that for a very long time too. Grateful for it. And the other thing was that really resonated with my time in treatment is that, you know, we keep what we have by giving it away. And that seems to me that's exactly what you're doing. And those two sentences particularly, those two statements, really hit me. And I thought, yeah, she knows, because I know, and it's a similar place. Not exactly similar. There are lots of things that are dissimilar, but those two statements, I mean, said it all for me. And I know what your journey is. I feel I do. And it's very similar to mine. And yeah, what you've just said has moved me no end. But it's almost like I've found another kindred spirit. I found someone else who knows, who relates, who is, yeah, we said we weren't going to use victim. We said we weren't going to use recovery, but we are in recovery, I guess, in some ways, for want of a better description, but we're certainly not victims.
No. And I think that's what I've learned, you know, and that's why I had to get out. I found a lived experience role challenging, because people had me labeled before as the mental patient, and then I was the voice of lived experience. You know, I couldn't be everybody's voices. I certainly wasn't afraid to say, because, you know, when you've lost everything, it doesn't matter what table, who you're sitting with around the table, when you've looked at death in the face and thought about that day in and day out, you've got out of bed with that hopelessness, you know, and it's a contradiction I have to accommodate within myself, because there are times when the shame and the not enough and all those things is so intense. That's why I have a safety plan. I don't, you know, I know where I've been, and, you know, I'm dealing with what comes up in the present, because it's not about hashing up the trauma from the past. It's how it's affecting me in the here and the now and what's coming out. But I'm also not, I know, you know, I know where I've come from, and it's important for me to remember that, because we can get, you know, I can get caught in using the language in the system I was in, that then becomes, you become part of the problem in many ways. And yet at the end of the day, whenever I've connected with other human beings, just as human beings, I've realized we're all so much more similar than we are different. You know, we really are. And it's so lovely just to feel that somebody has connected and got you in some way. I mean, I speak about that often, being seen and heard, you know, when you just become a whatever. And I think we could be doing an awful lot more to just be seeing and hearing people. Training, and you can have the best evidence base in the world. If you do not have a human connection and relationship and building trust and those things, it doesn't matter how smart or rich or trained or whatever you are. We need a human being to be with us in this distress. You know, we really, really do.
How loud is your voice? Sorry, Lisa.
No.
How loud is your voice to ask for a human being to be there, as opposed a multiple trained, etc.? How loud is that voice to say, excuse me, just look at me as a human?
How loud is my voice with that?
Yeah.
Well, it's been interesting. I've been challenged over the last year where I've needed more intensive help from services.
Yeah.
That's the only place I can go. So I was very afraid that I would need that, but it was part of the work. I have just a therapist that is, I just can't even explain, just amazing human being. And just so real, you know, just so human. But also I have to say, you know, she specialized in trauma and dissociation and EMDR. And for me, that's what I needed. Everybody needs different things. I've needed that. That's what I needed. It's come at a good time. What did you ask me again about a voice? I got off on. I'm just
You have beautiful answers. Do you know what? I'm loving the tangents. I think that you are incredibly eloquent, and you know, thank you for sharing it. And maybe I can answer my question. Your voice is loud because it's clear, it has clarity, and it's human, and it's full of your vulnerability and your own compassion and the recognition that you have of other people, perhaps always not getting it right, but if you're human, great.
Yeah, I do. I think people respond to that authenticity, that just being real. I was talking about needing crisis services.
Yes.
Talking about my voice. Do you know, and we talk about this mental health narrative as well. And I realized suddenly I was needing more crisis kind of services, that support, not because I was ill. It was just a flood of, I've had lots of trauma, you know, and I've got a lot of new learning to do, and it takes time to do that. So, but my own judgments of myself, and I can only go to services, and thank goodness, I mean, I worked in the trust that I use the services in as well.
Oh, okay.
I haven't actually needed them for a good while, and then in this last year I have. And I left the trust in the end of December. And that was a really good process for me to go through, because my own judgment, first of all, well, I'm needing more intensive services, which means there's something wrong with me. Because that's what the narrative tells you, and that's what I'm programmed to believe. So I had to overcome my own internal, because I can speak up for myself, I've almost managed to ask for what I need and get it. And I think some people who know me maybe are afraid. They think, oh God, Lisa Morrison, she's been referred in. What are we going to do here? That she's the woman who goes off on a tangent about, I've got an 8-page safety plan form. Don't do this or that. If I'm very distressed, I need to blah, 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 blah. And do you know what happened? I've got it all there. But you know what? I used that safety plan and I used it with the crisis team. They found it fantastic. They didn't know a lot of the stuff about my trauma, because I explained very briefly about how it affects me personally, my trauma and dissociation, what works for me when I'm in that state, what doesn't when I'm highly distressed. Brilliant partnership we had.
Yeah.
You know, I had to work through my own judgments of myself and say, do you know what? No better or worse than you just because I'm needing this. This doesn't make me any less able to do my work. I've sat at tables with directors at regional tables where I have seen things on the wall, had little voices chirping here, you know, hallucinations or whatever, just part of the trauma symptoms. I understand where they come from.
Yeah.
So, you know, I don't say that explicitly when I'm sitting at a meeting, but like, you know, nobody questioned my competence there. So why suddenly, because I need extra help, should I feel any less than anybody else?
Yeah, I think there's a mantra of mine that sort of, that really relates to that. And I use it a lot on myself, and that, you know, and I say, and I've written it a couple of times too in various pieces of work, is that, you know, at this point in time, personally and professionally, I'm as well as I can be. And I think that's often enough.
Yeah.
In fact, not just often, it's enough. It is enough.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just a journey, hey?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Joe, we say it every time. We could carry on talking all day. I hope, I can't thank you enough, Lisa. And David, I'm going to thank you because you are always so beautifully vulnerable when you reflect in a guest. And I know that your story has made such a difference to many people, David. So do you know what? Thank you for coming up and being David Buckler, okay? But Lisa Morrison, thank you. Totally and utterly from the bottom of my heart for your voice. I am so glad you're heard. I am so glad you're seen. And you know what? Most of all, really selfishly, so glad you're still here because I get to know you. And so do all these people watching. And David, I know is.
Really. I can only echo what Aneesh has said, Lisa. It's been a real privilege and an honour. So thank you.
Thank you. I always, you know what, I always feel inadequate with these things because there's so much should be saying and advocating for and covering. You know, that feeling you're always doing someone a disservice out there. But I think also just to say to people in Northern Ireland, you can phone Lifeline or Samaritans. There's also safety planning sites. If you follow Alice Cole King on Twitter, she's got safetyplanning.net, which is a co-produced. It's got the safety plan site just for anybody who wants it. It's online. It's a much bigger piece of work, but that's an available resource out there as well.
And we will put this on the resources underneath this video. We will put links for you. We're not going to just leave you lot out there, okay? But pick up the phone.
Yeah.
Go downstairs and tell somebody if you feel like that.
It does, yeah, it does. The light appears again. It does. With the right help sometimes.
David.
Thanks, both of you. Yeah.
Talk us out, David, my love. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us. Thank you again, Lisa. I can't really thank you enough. And Aneesh, as always, thank you for bringing us in and guiding us through. And I do very often feel like a part of something that's really important to me. And this is one of those times. Yeah, I think I'm going to leave it there and say thank you again. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.